Hello, friends. Continuing our series of conversations with luminaries in science and other areas. I'm delighted to share with you a conversation today with two visionaries and futurists, Jamie Arbib and Tony Seba. And this is the book. It's called Stellar, with a bold promise, a world beyond limits and how to get there. If we truly understand the implications of this book, then we are moving into a new world order or new world economy, a new world paradigm. And if we don't, we might be sleepwalking to extinction. So we are at a very interesting crossroads now. And I would love to, first of all, welcome both of you, Jamie and Tony.
Thank
And
you.
Thanks for
my
having us.
Oh, thank you. And my first question is, what inspired you to write Stellar, and how does it build on your previous work, Rethinking Humanity?
So we spoke to you about 4 years ago, just after we had published Rethinking Humanity, and that was a book that was about the impact of technology on society, and we dived into the what we call the organizing system, the political structures, the economic system, the social systems, and how they were kind of influenced by technology and how they might change. But we sort of missed out the human from Rethinking Humanity, and Tony and I, it's been a kind of critical part of our journey, I guess, and we were very keen to focus much more on the human in Stellar. And secondly, I think since we published Rethinking Humanity, our thinking's moved on dramatically. I think we've really distilled and kind of got to the root of the exploration that we were on. So really, what we were looking at was we were really asking the question, what really underpins our world today? What really causes us as humans to be the way we are? What causes our political, economic, social systems to be the way they are? And what really is the kind of root cause of the problems we face? Like because if we're ever to solve those problems, we need to get to the root. And so, it's been an extraordinary few years that we've had. And we really feel that the pieces of the puzzle have come together. And by understanding essentially our society today, we can begin to think about what becomes possible when we look forward. So that was, I guess, the inspiration for this. And it's like writing a book. We just couldn't not write it. We've been compelled to go on this journey together, and it's been an amazing few years.
Yeah, we're both animated. Well, we've been animated for 9 years, working together by, essentially solving two things. One is the disruption, technology disruption, and their implications for society. What are the implications and the implications of the implications for society? And we've looked at more than 1,500 disruptions throughout history. The number two thing that animates both of us is, how do we really solve the world's most important issues, right? And it turns out that the answer to both those things is the same. And we went deep, 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 asking why, to get to the root of civilization, and also very wide to get to the implication of the implication. So that is the overall kind of idea of how we get to this point. We wanted to get to the very root of civilization, and we think we did.
Yeah, I think so. I think you did too. But let's elaborate on the concept of the stellar world. What makes it fundamentally different from the current extractive paradigm?
Yeah. So maybe we'll start by just briefly explaining what the extractive paradigm is. In our analysis, we've been in this extractive paradigm for 12,000 years or 10,000 years, since the dawn of the Neolithic Revolution. And really, the extractive paradigm is our paradigm of production. right? It's the way we produce the things we need. So what we do in that paradigm is that we harness inputs, right? If you're an economist, you'd call them land, labor, capital, but really people and planet. We take things from labor and we take things from the planet and we apply technology, essentially knowledge to those things to produce the outputs that we want. Now that system is based on scarce inputs, and it's based on inputs that are kind of external to that system. What we'd also call excludable, i.e., I have them or you have them. And the issue with a system like that is that you come into competition with those people around you, right? You need a constant flow of inputs through that system to meet your needs. And so you're constantly competing with others. So really society becomes driven by competitive advantage, right? The ability to kind of outgrow all those neighbors that are within reach of you at whatever period of history you're in. So you need to increase your military capabilities, your technological capabilities. You need to increase your wealth and your scale and your reach and so on. It's what we call the growth imperative, right? And that's really the underlying dynamic that drives society. We might think of it as a sort of evolutionary context, right? In terms of the things we see in society get selected against that context of growth, right? So it underpins, how we build our societies, like the political systems that emerge, the economic systems, the social structures, they've emerged within that context. It underpins us as humans, right? How we behave, the kinds of thought models that are preferred within that context. The emotions we feel, the behaviors we exhibit. I think as individuals, we're capable of a vast spectrum of behaviors, actions, emotions, and so on. But the context drives us towards certain ways of thinking, towards certain behaviors, towards certain emotions that confer an advantage. And extraction also drives the problem we face. The problems we face. So things like environmental degradation, inequality, conflict. These are kind of hardwired into extraction. Right? They're the essence of the system, and this is really important to understand because in that world, it's really an advantage to exploit people, right? And that's why we've seen slavery, in pretty much every major civilization through history. That you have, you essentially get cheap labor the more you exploit. It's an advantage to exploit the planet. You get cheap resources, and so environmental degradation, inequality, these things are hardwired into the system. They're essentially features, not bugs. And there's very little we can do to solve them. Because if that's the root of civilization, if extraction is really the root of civilization, that need to harness external inputs, if that's the root, then you can't cure those problems, right? They're the essence of the system. You can only make them a little bit less bad. But you can only make them less bad to the extent that it doesn't affect your competitive advantage in relation to your neighbors. So you only have a kind of a small room to operate. And I think that's critical to understand. Now, stellar technologies are fundamentally different, right? So what we're seeing emerging in certainly in energy and in intelligence, what we call artificial labor, artificial intelligence plus robotics. So what we're seeing with these technologies are a stellar technology is a technology that once it's built, it requires no further inputs. So if we think at the most simple scale of a solar panel, you need a huge amount of resources, energy, intelligence, labor to build solar panels. But once they're built, they just radiate energy for 50 plus years. If you think of artificial intelligence as well, you need a huge amount of energy, a huge amount of data, a huge amount of human input to build an artificial intelligence. But at a certain point in time, what we'll see is that intelligence becomes self-improving, right? Becomes and it begins to it hits the kind of ignition point where essentially intelligence becomes embodied within the technology. And once you have artificial intelligence and robotics, artificial labor, then your energy system can self-repair, self-build, self-improve as well. And so these stellar technologies are essentially technologies that once you get to this ignition point, require no further inputs from either people or planet. no further land, labor, or capital. Essentially, the land, the labor, and the capital are embodied in the technology. And every generation of that technology can produce, essentially more output from the same molecules that are embodied in that technology. I'm sure Tony will explain that better than I can.
No, I mean, so it goes, these are two fundamentally different system. Extraction has an extraction flow, a constant flow of land, labor, and capital. I mean, think of cars, think of a power plant, a coal power plant or a gas power plant. You need a constant flow of extractive resources and people working in that value chain. So it's everything is external. Land, labor, capital are external. We work for the extractive system, people and planet. But in a stellar system, all of these things are embodied in the system. Land, labor, capital are embodied in the system. So the only input that we need is sunshine. But everything else, it improves itself. It's a fundamentally different system.
Okay, so I get what you're saying both. And this is, this came to mind as you were speaking. The analogy of a baby being born. So before it's born, it's totally extracting everything from its mother. And then as soon as it's born, the extraction, it continues actually with breastfeeding and the mother's help and food and care and all that. But once it grows up, it becomes autonomous in that it's no longer extracting from the mother. It's a kind of a development phase. And what you're, I think, suggesting is that humanity needs to go through that same development phase, where it becomes independent of its mother. After all, we are made of the planet, we are made of Earth. And so we extract from the Earth, even though we are made of Earth, it's our mother. But as we develop, hopefully in consciousness, understand the deeper reality, then we no longer extract from the mother, we extract from that which nourished the mother. In a way, that's a stellar economy. And, even as you were speaking and saying, the solar panel is a good example, I was thinking, I just read an article the other day in some science magazine that science are able to convert light into solid material now, which actually supports the whole unified theories of electromagnetism, strong, weak interactions, being part of the quantum field, which appears as photons and can be actually ultimately made into materials. And I was thinking even AI and all these things ultimately could be powered by light. Why not? I mean, I wear these wearables which are currently powered by, electrical input. But I was reading they could be powered by mitochondria through the sweat. It's fascinating where this could lead to. So, how do you envision humanity overcoming the turbulence of this transition to a new societal model? First of all, do you agree with what my comments? Are they even relevant?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely spot on. I think, the baby is a great analogy, or the child is a great analogy. We use in the book, we use the analogy of the caterpillar and the butterfly. And
That's
I
great.
think it's really important to stress that there's nothing inherently kind of good or bad about extraction, right? We've needed it. It's an essential stepping stone on this journey that humanity is on. And it's got us to where we are. And we're reaching the end game of extraction. We're kind of reaching the limits of how much we can extract. But it's got us here, and we've needed. I think we say in the book that you can't have a butterfly without a caterpillar. So it's definitely a stage we need to go through. But in many ways, we kind of have everything we need now to go through that transformation. or to go through that metamorphosis. But undoubtedly, over time, the technologies will get far better, right? I mean, that's irrespective. I think Tony and I are trying to ground it in today. You know, the technologies of today can essentially replace or transform land, labor, capital as inputs. We can do everything. We can create a system that requires nothing more from people or planet. It's essentially a higher order civilization where people and planet essentially transcend that system of production, and that's kind of critical to
And,
understand.
and I want to add that stellar is also, I mean, for the scientifically minded folks in the audience, it's a negative entropy system. So it's a system that can endure. In fact, it's the only system that endures. Extraction, though, is a high entropy system, and by definition is self-destructive. And that's why we have seen every great civilization throughout history self-destroy, because it's a high negative, high entropy system, extraction is, whereas stellar is a negative entropy system. So not only does it fulfill all its needs because land, labor, capital are embodied, but also it can help restore itself and its surroundings. So that's a negative entropy system. However, going from a self-destructive high entropy system to a negative entropy system that can endure is that metamorphosis. And metamorphosis is painful. So what we're seeing, the chaos, the conflict, the inequality that have been dialed up, that we feel it, I mean, it is the end game of extraction. We see it. I mean, all the qualitative and quantitative metrics basically are there. We're at the end game. And if all you saw was extraction, then essentially you would have the choices that our political system are giving us, which is, do we tear it down or do we patch it up? And those are not, they're not great choices, but those are the only choices that we're seeing out there, whether it's in the US election or around the world. Do we tear it down? Do we patch it up, right? But either way, it's all about chasing our tails, right? We cannot patch it up. We cannot solve issues, extraction issues that are inherent to extraction. And that's why we're seeing that climate, COP is chasing its tail. That's why we're seeing inequality increasing. That's why, so the only North Star that we can possibly see is stellar. Stellar is the only way out. Is the only.
Would you say that photosynthesis, which is, a stellar gift on this planet, which is the basis of all life, actually, is a negative entropy system, right?
Absolutely. It absolutely is. I mean, we're essentially for billions of years before human, actually before extraction, because humans were actually part of the biosphere before, but in a way that we're not now, right? But absolutely, photosynthesis turned photons, turned the sunshine into life, and Earth thrived, with the ups and downs and so on, with photosynthesis. And if you look at stellar energy, it's the modern version, it's the modern technological version of photosynthesis. Solar panels are 100 times more efficient than photosynthesis, right? But the idea is the same, right? Turn photonic energy into land, labor, and capital.
Beautiful.
So Deepak, we don't want to fall foul of the physicists out there. So we're talking at the Earth system level that when we're taking light, essentially light from the sun as the energy input, then at the Earth system level, it can be negative entropy. Essentially, it creates, it creates order from disorder, and so at that level, it's negative entropy.
Yeah. So you both discussed technology convergence as a driver of change. Which sectors do you believe will experience the most profound disruptions in the next decade?
Wow.
Every sector.
Where do we start, Tony? So everything, we think. I mean, and the whole of human civilization as well. But certainly, what we in the book call the stellar core is stellar energy, basically solar, wind, and batteries today. Although I'm sure, as you say, we'll have other forms of energy as we move forward, and artificial labor, artificial intelligence plus robotics. Because with those two things, you really have everything else, right? You have healthcare, you have food and agriculture, you have materials, you have education, you have pretty much every sector of the economy. So for us, those are the core of this new stellar world. And if we get those right, then pretty much anything's possible. They're what's critical to ensuring that we move from that extractive paradigm into a stellar paradigm.
Yeah. So in a way, this is not. We don't have a menu of choosing the things that we want to preserve or whatever. Everything will be transformed. Absolutely everything. Every single industry, every single institution, every single belief system is going to be transformed. Monetary system, you name it, it's going to be transformed. And when I say transformed, we're talking again. Caterpillar and butterfly. These are two different life forms, and one eats. The one doesn't even have a mouth, right? And flies, and it's beautiful, and so on. So it's essentially two different, if you will, it's a metamorphosis. So in the past, Jamie.
Oh no, Tony, I was just going to add, it might be worth throwing a little bit of color on the kind of the history that we start the book with, just to explain a little more clearly. But really, I think what we're saying is look, if you go back through human civilization, you go back to say Sumer, right, 5,000 years ago, the first great civilization, at least the first one of which we have proper records for. You see the same essence of society today, and I'm talking in terms of our economic system, our political system, our social structures. And so we have central government, we have hierarchy, we have division of labor, we have trade and markets and money and debt. We have the nuclear family. We have similar types of culture in many ways, a kind of consumer society. We have the same measures of success, wealth and things that are external to us. And the reason for that is because we're in the same paradigm. Like all of those things confer an advantage. Yes, sure, today is a little bit different. We have, democracy instead of monarchy and so on. But basically, at its essence, at its roots, the system is the same. And all of those things essentially grew out of that root of extraction, that extractive production system we discussed, as well as how we are as individuals. And I think what we're really saying here is that, look, as that root dies, as we move to a stellar society, all of those things that had advantage in extraction will no longer have an advantage. In fact, assets might become liabilities as we move into this fundamentally different world. They've essentially evolved around those extractive technologies and that extractive paradigm. And as that root essentially dies, so too will the kind of the tree of extraction.
You both addressed this already. I was going to ask these questions, but I think you've already addressed them, that your framework for nonlinear change challenges traditional forecasting methods. And you also mentioned historical examples that particularly resonate with the transformation you describe in Stella. So let's move on to the societal implications. What role do political and economic systems play in facilitating or hindering this transition?
So, I mean, what we see throughout history over and over and over again, hundreds of examples, is that disruptions, transformative disruptions come from the edge. they never come from the incumbency. It's someone somewhere makes it happen, and then everybody else has to make it work for competitive reasons, because otherwise they could not compete. So we've seen that over and over and over again. What in the beginning seems to be slow, at some point becomes better and better. There is a convergence of technology, say the car in the late 1800s, the smartphone in the early 2000s. There's always a number of technologies that make something new possible. And only entrepreneurs, only someone from the edge has the incentives to make it work. And so they do. And at some point, those technologies, whether it was the car, which disrupted the horse, or the smartphone, which disrupted both the cell phone and a whole ton of other things, it ruptures the incumbent system, by which so in general, we live in what we call stable systems, right? In which moving a boulder is like pushing it uphill, right? That's the incumbent system. But when new technology essentially ruptures that system, what we see is that turns into a boulder on top of the mountain, in which change becomes fast and it becomes inevitable. And all you need to do is like nudge that boulder downhill in the direction that you want. So technologies come from the edge. When they happen, they rupture the system, and they happen non-linearly and very, very quickly. And we've seen this in hundreds of examples throughout history.
Yeah, I was reading that between the ages of the period 1887 to 1903, humanity saw the emergence of the light bulb, the automobile, the airplane, and the telephone, all less than 20 years. And if you had been shipwrecked on an island, let's say in 1885, rescued in 1905, you wouldn't recognize the world. It was leapfrogging into a new era. And I think what you're saying is this leapfrogging is happening right now.
Right now, exactly. And it's huge. And so what you see in history is, I mean, we see Rome collapses, and at the edge of empire, Europe, the British Empire rises with the new technologies and the new organizing system, and then it collapses. And then on the edge of that empire is America, which takes those new technologies and makes them work. It didn't happen in the then incumbency in the 1800s, which is the British Empire, right? So it's always on the edge. And we believe that this time, the major transformation is going to be initiated also at the edge.
How can society prepare for potential risks such as inequality or resistance to change during this transformation?
Yeah, so I mean, what Tony and I think is inevitable is that these stellar technologies outcompete the old extractive ones. So we'll see stellar energy come on, and we are seeing stellar energy outcompete. We'll see, I mean, let's not argue over the timescale, but at some point over the next decades, artificial labor will replace human labor. There'll be nothing that we can outcompete artificial labor in. And so, it's inevitable that these technologies, win out, barring essentially societal collapse, that they win out. So that's the first level of change. The second level of change are kind of, well, it's what we call society's organizing system. So the political, economic, social structures. And right now, what we have today is optimized and evolved around those extractive technologies within that paradigm of extraction. So private ownership, for instance, is one of those things that won out within extraction, the kind of government we have, and so on and so forth. But stellar technologies are fundamentally different. They're distributed. They have different properties where actually collaboration confers an advantage, say, rather than competition. So, if we essentially shoehorn those stellar technologies into those old organizing structures, we're in a dystopia. It's essentially what Tony and I refer to as, sticking wings on a caterpillar and expecting it to fly. But of course, that's not a butterfly at all. It's a horrible chimera. And I think if we do that, what we'll see is we don't get the full benefits of those stellar technologies, and we get a host of other problems that come with it. And by that I mean we'll see rampant inequality where maybe a handful of people in Silicon Valley or in China essentially own the world's labor. I mean it could be the most unequal society that humanity's ever seen. And in fact humans have always been needed for their labor. We've always had a card to play even when we were oppressed, in terms of resisting, and it could just be a really terrible situation. So we have to make sure that those organizing systems adapt to the new paradigm, and that's what Tony was talking about, incumbency. It's really difficult to do that in places that are kind of leading today, where they're essentially there are kind of truths, right? They go far far deeper, and they're extremely difficult to change. But the third level of change, which is almost the most important one, is the change to us as humans, right? So even if we get technology right, and even if we get the organizing systems right, if we go into that world as extractive humans, it will cause huge problems as well, because we'll just want more and more and more. And I think our argument is that with these stellar technologies and in a stellar world, that actually we as humans will transform in the way we think, in the way we behave, and the way we act, but also in the kind of level of consciousness we can reach. That we essentially transcend the system of production, and so we're no longer pushed towards those more extractive behaviors, and that kind of transformation
what you're suggesting is that concepts like ownership, labor, and wealth will all drastically evolve into a complete new mindset. Wealth, ownership, and labor, all as we think, gone, right?
Gone. I mean, the today's monetary system gone, right? But gone because it doesn't confer an advantage anymore, right? I mean, in a stellar system, land, labor, and capital are embodied in the system, right? So ownership and so on do not confer an advantage, and in fact, we believe that they confer a disadvantage. So we'll need a new set of belief systems and institutions and so on to make that production system work, right? That we can't just shoehorn stellar technologies into today's institution and so on, because it'll be a disadvantage. The society that can change dramatically in terms of the advantages that stellar technologies can give, those are going to be the winning societies, and everybody else is going to have to copy them.
In a sense, it's kind of Buddhist, right? The separate self doesn't exist. Objects don't exist by themselves. Everything is entangled, and we're one biological organism, whatever we choose to call it, the universe. So, what actionable steps can individuals, businesses, and governments take today to align with your vision of the stellar world?
So I think the first thing that everyone can do is to see this, right? I mean, right now we're so embedded in extraction. That's our world. We use a phrase in the book. We are the fish, and extraction is our water. Right? I mean, everything that we can't see beyond extraction. We don't even realize we're in extraction. It's just our world. And so I think the first thing is to see beyond extraction and to see the possibility of a fundamentally different paradigm. And I think that's critical. And that's really, why we published this book, and why Tony and I are, so keen to kind of promote these ideas, because the first step obviously is to see it. The second step then is really to do it, is to begin to put it into action. And I think, certainly governments and businesses, once they see it, they'll see the huge opportunities that come with leadership. right? So the period of transformation, essentially the rules of extraction still apply, right? We need extraction to build this stellar world. And so, there's huge opportunities for regions who lead and build this stellar energy system, say in the first instance, to capture all the value that comes with that, the exposure to a new paradigm of essentially superabundant, cheap, or even free energy. And what you do with that free, cheap energy, the applications and use cases that will create huge value. So I think it's realizing that actually this is a race to the top, or as we call it, a race to the stars. That actually getting going and just beginning to move is critical. And as we've discussed, it's really hard to do in those countries that are leading today. But there are plenty of places that we speak to now who can do it. And then I think at an individual level, it's the same thing. It's just that personal journey, the ability to kind of work on ourselves and to realize that this is going to be a period of profound dislocation and instability and change, and to learn essentially to lean into that change, to welcome it, to not resist it. And in some ways, that's a kind of vaccination to the kind of populist narrative out there. I mean, I love the word, Nassim Taleb's word, anti-fragile. Like things that get stronger through stress, and I think that's what we need to develop. I mean, certainly that's what I work on with my children. Is how do we develop that anti-fragility to ourselves and our systems, so that as we go through this period, we don't break. We actually thrive and learn and grow.
And just to emphasize that this is a transformation at the individual level as much as a transformation at the social level. I think that only stellar beings can bring a stellar world. And so it's a journey as much as an individual as it is in your relationships, in your community, and at the highest social level, right? It's a transformation, metamorphosis again, at all level, from the individual to the biosphere. It's not just going to happen out there, and then we can wait here until it happens. I mean, we're going to have to, like a tadpole, just jump out of the water, right? Just take the first step or jump, whether it's putting up a solar panel on your rooftop or starting this personal transformation journey. Just take the first step. It's a transformation at absolutely all levels.
Well, given your example of both the tadpole and the caterpillar, it's a death and a resurrection at the same time. It's a radical new context, new meaning, new relationships, new story. So what industries or innovations are currently leading the way in creating this future, if any?
I mean, what we call the stellar core, which is what we see as the next platform for humanity, is energy, solar, wind, and battery, and also artificial intelligence and robotics, which we call artificial labor. And once we have stellar energy gives you stellar intelligence. Stellar energy gives you stellar labor. And on top of those, you can essentially build all the other industries, whether it's education, transportation, food, with technologies such as precision fermentation, and so on. But as a society, if you had to prioritize, I would prioritize those. First, stellar energy, and then artificial labor.
Well, the last or almost last question for both of you is that how has your research shaped your personal outlook on humanity? Are you optimistic or cautious? Where do you stand, each of you?
Yeah. So maybe I'll go first, Tony. So I'm optimistic. I don't think it's going to be a simple journey. I think actually, humanity's been on this hero's journey, right? In some ways for tens of thousands of years, and in some ways extraction was a kind of a dip into the darker side from which we must re-emerge. And I think we are, I think we both believe that we're products of our context in many ways, that extraction helps make us who we are, that there's an advantage to thinking in a kind of linear mechanistic way, as opposed to a much more holistic and complex manner. There's an advantage to certain types of relationships, to kind of control, and to all kinds of what we might term dysfunctional behaviors. And I think we're often driven to that. We live in many ways, we're just unaware. We're just in this world where we're desperately trying to feed ourselves to stay afloat, to keep our heads above water, and we don't have that ability to step back and look around and reach that kind of level of awareness, perhaps, or consciousness that we might otherwise. And I think as we go through this traumatic period of transformation, I think it's going to be, it will bring out both the best and the worst of us. And I think it's
Yeah,
going to be a very difficult transformation.
it
Bernie?
is. But I'm also incredibly optimistic. Incredibly optimistic because for the first time in 12,000 years, we have a way out. Stellar is a way out of extraction. And also because this can happen because we have everything we need. We need to nudge that boulder. We have everything we need. And this can and probably will happen within one generation. This is not, something that, we're not talking hundreds of years out. We're talking about this generation can make it happen if we make the right choice. And to clarify, we don't need 200 countries to agree to do this. We don't. We just need 1, 2, 5 countries, regions, really, at the edge, not even at the incumbency, to make this work, because it's in their best interest to make this work. So put that all together, and if we get 5 or 6 smaller regions around the world to do this, it's what we call stellar nurseries. They can elevate their own societies to the highest order society ever in history. What's not to like about that? And they can make it work, even if this doesn't happen, which I don't believe it will happen in the centers of incumbency in the US, in the UK, and so on. This can only happen at the edge.
I was thinking of the Kingdom of Bhutan, where I know the king and the prime minister. I'll send them this conversation, but they are creating something called the Gelfu Mindfulness City, where they're looking at shifting the paradigm to what you're saying. They've already incorporated cryptocurrency. They are carbon negative as a nation, and they're looking to lead the way for not only just what you are calling a stellar economy, but also a new humanity, which is more fulfilling and happier. So I've been speaking to the authors of Stellar, The World Beyond Limits and How to Get There. James Arbib and Tony Seba. Pick up the book. And if there's any one key message or takeaway from Stella that you hope readers will remember after they read the book, what would that be?
So we have agency to change the world. That change always happens in this bottom-up, emergent way, but it doesn't come from the center and it's not imposed from the top. And that's actually hugely freeing. It means that each one of us in each community in each region has the ability to do this. And as Tony was saying earlier, it's just about taking the first step, seeing what's possible and moving.
And we have everything we need, and this is going to happen in one generation. So we have incredible agency for the first time in history. Basically, this moment in time is the best moment in time in history to enable transformative change. And we have everything we need, and this generation can make it happen.
Well, thank you both. It's been wonderful having this conversation. We'll make sure that as many people as possible get to hear it and read the book. Stellar. A
Thank
World
you.
Beyond Myths.
Thank you.
And Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.